Holla! What's up? What's up? Good Diaz here, coming at you live from DePaul Middle School. And hope everyone's having a good day so far. So here we go. Absolute value equations. This is first we got to talk about what actually absolute value is, and then once we get through what absolute value is, we can show you what the equations look like. So just a quick little refresh. Absolute value of a number is a distance from zero. So absolute value symbols are these straight lines just going up and down. So like don't confuse them with parentheses. This is parentheses with 4 inside the parentheses. Don't confuse absolute value with parentheses. They are straight lines. What I like to do when I draw them, I like to make them really long just so they don't get confused with like a 1. So make them quite a bit longer than the actual number when you're drawing it with a pencil so we don't mix them up. Now, with absolute value, because it is the distance from 0, we can ask ourselves, absolute value of positive and negative numbers actually will have the same value. Okay, so if I look at the absolute value of 4 and negative 4, well, 4 is 4 away from 0, but negative 4, looking at a number line, if I have 0 here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I have 1, 2, 3, 4. If I have negative 4 is the same distance away from 0 as positive 4. And when we talk about distance, we don't use negative numbers to talk about distance. Like if you're talking about how far away Walmart was from your house, you're not going to say Walmart is negative 3 miles away from your house. It doesn't make sense. Okay, we just say it's 3 miles away from your house, no matter which direction you're coming from. Same thing with absolute value. So because negative 4 is still 4 spots away from 0, the answer is always going to be positive. So the absolute value of negative 4 is positive 4. Okay, so absolute value is just distance from 0. That's the big summary from this first page. So when we're solving an absolute value equation, let's say I want to look like this. Absolute value of x plus 2 equals 7. So I have the absolute value of a number plus 2 is equal to 7. Well, if I were to solve this equation, we do what we normally do, okay? So we do the inverse operations. So because this is plus 2, I want to subtract 2 from both sides. Okay. I'm left with the absolute value of x is equal to 5. So what absolute value of what number is equal to 5? And that's when we're going to have actually 2 possible answers for the solution to this equation. Okay? Because the absolute value of negative 5 is equal to 5, and the absolute value of positive 5 is equal to 5. Okay? And so we need to address the fact that there's going to be 2 different possible values from the absolute value functions, as that's always going to be the positive value and the negative value. Okay? Now, and you can always plug it in to double check to make sure. So if I plug in the absolute value of negative 5 for x plus 2 equals 7, well, the absolute value of negative 5 is 5, and 5 plus 2 is going to give me 7. Okay? And we know it would also work with positive 5 as well. So here's what I want you guys to get down, because we're going to get to a little bit more complicated equations than that. To solve an absolute value equation, you have to absolute the absolute value expression first. Okay? I will show you what I mean by that, but we're going to get to some absolute value expressions that are nice and long like this. Okay? Or some absolute value equations or such. So what we want to do is when I say isolate the absolute value expression is what's in between the absolute value symbols. So we want to get that by itself first. So for this particular equation, when I say isolate it, I need to get rid of the 12, and then I also need to get rid of the times 2 by dividing by 2 on both sides. Okay? And so then that's always the first step. Get the absolute, where we have nothing but just what's in the absolute value expression by itself. Now we're going to write 2 different equations, one with a positive solution and one with a negative solution. Then we're going to solve both of the equations and get both of our solutions. Okay? So here's what we mean. So right now, let's look at the first thing we need to do. We need to isolate the absolute value expression. So when we mean by that, we're looking at, is there anything to do outside of the absolute value expression that we need to get rid of, and we need to move it over to the other side of the equal sign. And for this particular absolute value equation, there is not. I just have my absolute value symbols right here and some stuff going on the inside, so my absolute value expression is already isolated. Now, if I had absolute value of 2x minus 3 plus 2 equals 1, and now I would have to get rid of this plus 2 and isolate the expression. Okay? But I don't have to worry about that. So all I have is the absolute value of 2x minus 3. So step 1, already done. Now what I need to do is I need to write two separate equations, because I know this, if the end result of this is going to be 1, that means my end result of inside the absolute value expression needs to either be positive 1 or negative 1. And the reason why is if this is equal to negative 1, whatever's inside of here, then the absolute value of negative 1 is 1. The absolute value of positive 1 is 1. Okay, so we know the absolute value of, this is going to look weird because I have a bunch of 1s. The absolute value of negative 1 is 1, and we know the absolute value of positive 1 is 1. So I know this inside here can either equal negative 1 or positive 1 to give me this 1 for a solution. So those are the two equations I need to write. I have 2x minus 3 equals 1, and I also have 2x minus 3 equals negative 1. Okay? So now I just solved these two different equations to get my two solutions for my absolute value equation. Okay, so I have 2x equals 4, so x equals 2. So if I plug in 2 here, 2 times 2 is 4, minus 3 is 1. Is the absolute value of 1, 1? Yes. But I also have to figure out how to get negative 1 in there as well. So if I add 3 to both sides, now I get 2x equals positive 2 divided by 2, x equals 1. And that would also work as well, because if I plug in 1 here, 2 times 1 is 2, minus 3 is negative 1. The absolute value of negative 1 is equal to positive 1. Okay? Let's look at another one. First, I have a joke for you. Why is it sad that parallel lines have so much in common? So why is it sad that parallel lines just have so much in common? Because they'll never meet. They'll never meet. Whew. All right, moving on. So try this one on your own if you want. Okay, give this one a shot. See how you do. I think you can actually just solve it from here. Remember, isolate the absolute value expression first, and then you can worry about writing in two separate equations. Okay. So I'm going to isolate my absolute value expression first. I want to get rid of this minus a, and I want to get rid of this times 3. This is still multiplication. I know there's no parentheses, but when you have the value right up against the absolute value symbol, this represents multiplication right here, just so we know. So I'm going to add 8 to both sides. Goes away. I get 15. I still have 3 times x minus 2. And then now I'm going to divide by 3, because this is 3 times the absolute value, so I can divide by 3 on both sides. So the absolute value of x minus 2 is going to be equal to 5. So now I've isolated my absolute value expression. I got nothing else to do on that side of the equal sign. So now I can write my two separate equations. X minus 2 is equal to 5. But I also know that if this was negative 5, I would also get a solution of positive 5. So that means negative 5 as well, because I can figure out what would give me negative 5 in this expression. If I add 2 to both sides, x equals negative 3, add 2 to both sides, and I get x equals 7. So my solutions are x equals negative 3 and x equals 7. I am done. Those are both possible solutions for this equation. And again, if you wanted to make sure, you could take both of these and you can plug it in to your original expression. So I could do 3 times 7 minus 2 minus 8 equals 7. Well, 7 minus 2 is 5. So when I simplify this, we are going to kind of treat the absolute values as if it's like a parentheses, where we're going to worry about that first. Okay, so this is 3 times the absolute value of 5, which means it's just 3 times positive 5 minus 8 equals 7. 15 minus 8 is 7. So we did it. We're good. And then I would also do the same thing with negative 3. And right away, we know negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5. The absolute value of negative 5 is positive 5, which will get me right back to here. Okay. I think this is the last one. Let me double check. Yep. So last problem, same process. So let's go ahead and isolate my absolute value expression. So I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides this time, which is fine. And I'm going to get negative 3 here. 3 times x plus 6 is equal to negative 3. Now, when I divide by 3, we'll notice here, I get the absolute value of x plus 6 is equal to negative 1. Now, my question is, if we isolate our absolute value function, and we have a negative answer on the right side of the equal sign. So my question is in the beginning, did we say that absolute value, is it possible for it to be a negative number? If the absolute value has to be positive, or if the absolute value represents the distance from 0, that means it's always going to be positive, because distance when we talk about distance, we always talk about positive distance. Like I said, we don't say -3 miles from something or -2 feet away. We always say it's 2 feet away from either direction. So there is no way I can solve this because the absolute value of -1 is +1. The absolute value of +1 is +1. There's no way for me to get the absolute value of something to get a negative answer. I cannot get an absolute value of something to get a negative answer. So therefore, there's no solution. This is impossible. There's no solution to this particular inequality. I'm sorry, not inequality, absolute value equation. Whew. Okay. So no solution because all I have is a negative value on the right-hand side. Now, one thing I want you guys to be cautious of, and so this sometimes got to make up on the fly real quick, so one thing I want you guys to be cautious of. Let's say I have the absolute value of x plus 2 minus 8 equals -1. Now, some people will look at this right away and say, oh, well, it's got a negative answer, so therefore there is no solution to this particular equation. And that is false because I have not isolated my absolute value function yet. So what I mean by that, or my absolute value expression. So what I mean by that is there's this -8 still kind of floating out here. I still have to get rid of that. And if I add 8 to both sides, I still have the absolute value of x plus 2. That's equal to +7. Like, this is possible because now by adding the 8 to both sides and isolating this absolute value expression, I now have a positive value on the opposite side, which means I can solve it. Like, this is fine. Okay, and I can figure out what my answers are. So I know this has to be 7, so x is going to be 5, and it's going to be negative, so we need -7, so it's going to be -9. Okay, and that would still make this true. So it's okay if there's a negative sign on the right side before we isolate the absolute value expression. But once we isolate the absolute value expression, if we have a negative solution, there's no solution because that's impossible to do. Okay, and that's it. So hopefully this wasn't too bad. Let me know if you guys have any questions. And hey, thank you for watching.